Life, wisdom. I'm Psyche Truth correspondent Karina Rachel. Thank you for watching The Truth Talks. I'm joined today by Dr. Colin Ross. He's a psychiatrist and author based out of Dallas, Texas. And in this video, we're going to continue our discussion of the latest diagnostic and statistical manual published by the American Psychiatric Association. So this is the DSM-5, and in a previous video, we talked more generally about this book, and I encourage you to check out this video. And in this video, we're going to go a little bit more into detail about how a psychiatrist might use this book and what obstacles they might meet. So thank you so much for being here with me.
Thanks for the opportunity. So what I want to do now is basically what you just said is forget about the overview of the DSM-5. Now we're just going to go inside it and try and use it based on the rules and the diagnostic criteria that are in here. And I guarantee you're going to get confused.
Okay, I'm ready.
So remember, this is now 19 years since the previous edition and 61 years since the first edition. Okay. So all the top psychiatrists, all the committees, all the experts have been studying the literature and researching and discussing and getting together and thinking and draft after draft. And now here's where we're at. So what's the definition of a delusion? So I'm going to be talking about delusional disorders and obsessive compulsive disorders.
Okay.
So a delusion is a false belief based on incorrect inference about external reality that is firmly held despite what almost everyone else believes and despite what constitutes incontrovertible and obvious proof or evidence to the contrary. And then there's a qualifier. The belief is not ordinarily accepted by other members of the person's culture or subculture, e.g. it's not an article of religious faith. So it has to be kind of personal, idiosyncratic, not something shared by others. It's a false belief that is firmly held despite evidence to the contrary and despite what other people believe. So that's what a delusion is. So then in the section on psychotic disorders, which includes schizophrenia and related disorders, we've got delusional disorder. And it's defined as the presence of one or more delusions with a duration of 1 month or longer. And the criteria for schizophrenia aren't met, so you're not having hallucinations, your thinking isn't all disorganized. So basically you have this one delusional, or 2 or 3 delusional beliefs, but your thinking is basically intact and rational, and outside your delusions, you're kind of an average, typical person. And then it says a couple other things, like it can't be due to some other disorder. And then it gets into specify which subtype it is. So there's erotomanic subtype, is where you believe that a movie star is secretly sending you messages and is in love with you, and as soon as they get rid of their spouse, they're going to come and take you off to Jamaica or somewhere. And so then we go through subtypes. We get to somatic type. This subtype applies when the central theme of the delusion involves bodily functions or sensations. So it's a fixed, firmly held false belief having to do with your body. So it's a body delusion. And that can include typically things like you believe that you smell horribly bad and other people are repulsed by your smell when you're just completely normal. Or you believe you're incredibly ugly, misshapen, disfigured, and you often do things like, in extreme case, like wash your face with urine to try and get this horrible look off of your face, and everybody else thinks you just look normal. So that's a delusional disorder, which is a completely separate section from obsessive compulsive disorder, and it's kind of related to schizophrenia. And so one type of delusional disorder is a fixed false belief that there's something really bad about your body. So then we get over to obsessive compulsive disorder, which is way over in the manual, and it's its own section, obsessive compulsive and related disorders. So this is the presence of obsessions and delusions. Obsessions are the thinking, and obsessions and compulsions. Obsessions are the thinking, compulsions are the behavior. So if you're always arranging everything so it has to be totally lined up and neat and tidy, that's a compulsive behavior. If you have a thought over and over, like you have to count things or ruminate about something over and over and over and over, that's the thinking part of it. And so it describes repetitive behaviors. It goes into some details. And then it says that you can have obsessive-compulsive disorder with good or fair insight. So you know that the thinking is unrealistic. You know that you don't really need to be washing your hands 100 times a day, but you just feel overwhelming urge to do it that you can't win the battle against. Or it can be with poor insight, or it can be with absent insight / delusional beliefs. So if you completely buy that there's something horribly wrong with your body and you have to wash your hands 100 times a day, and you have no insight into it whatsoever, that's obsessive-compulsive disorder with absent insight, delusional beliefs. But if you have delusional beliefs about there being something wrong with your body, that's a delusional disorder. It's in a completely separate section. But what's the difference?
Right.
There's no difference whatsoever. So using these rules, how do you decide when, okay, this delusional belief about the person's body is actually an example of a delusional disorder, somatic type, or obsessive-compulsive disorder with absent insight, delusional beliefs? It's completely arbitrary. There's no way to decide.
Right.
So these two committees haven't cross-talked with each other, and there's no guidance, so you just kind of flip a coin.
Right.
So,
and arguably the treatments that would then be associated with either of those diagnoses would likely be different.
Well, supposedly they'd be different, but in fact, they're not that different anyway, because there's only a certain number of psych meds to give, or you do some behavioral treatment. So this is a section called obsessive-compulsive and related disorders. So they're all in the same section, but it's not obsessive-compulsive disorder. We've got body dysmorphic disorder. So body dysmorphic disorder is not a delusional disorder. It's closely related to obsessive-compulsive disorder, but it's separate and distinct. So that's preoccupation with one or more perceived defects or flaws in physical appearance that are not observable or appear slight to others. So when you've got this rigidly held belief that there's something wrong with your body, that's not delusional disorder somatic type. That's not obsessive-compulsive disorder. That's body dysmorphic disorder. So we've got three separate disorders that are exactly the same thing.
Right.
And how are you supposed to tell the difference between them? And so at some point during the course of the disorder, body dysmorphic disorder, the individual has performed repetitive behaviors. So you have to have the behavior and the belief, which is like the obsession and the compulsion, or the delusion and the behavior. So examples of the types of behavior people with body dysmorphic disorder do include mirror checking, excessive grooming, skin picking. So if you think there's something wrong with your skin, nobody else can see it, you're constantly picking at it, that's body dysmorphic disorder, not obsessive-compulsive disorder. But if you think that you have germs on your hands and you wash your hands 100 times a day, that's obsessive-compulsive disorder, not body dysmorphic disorder.
Okay.
But then when we carry on in the manual, we've got another disorder called excoriation, brackets, skin picking disorder.
But that was just the example used in the previous.
Right. But now we've got a totally separate disorder, separate from body dysmorphic disorder, separate from obsessive-compulsive disorder, separate from delusional disorder somatic type, in which there's recurrent skin picking resulting in the skin lesions. So, I mean, the whole thing, it makes absolutely no sense. It's just complete chaos mess.
And I think that these examples you're showing really do kind of indicate how arbitrary these things are, as you mentioned a second ago, where, yes, clearly, if we just took this one example of skin picking and somebody who came in presenting this, you've got 4 different completely separate categories of disorders that person could fall under.
And 3 of them are within the same general category of obsessive-compulsive disorder. But one of them's in a way distant, removed category that's like a neighbor of schizophrenia. So you can sort of see that these are variations on the same theme of obsessive-compulsive disorder. One person's obsessed with counting, another person's obsessed with checking, another person's obsessed with germs on their hand. That makes sense. It's all kind of in the same general ballpark. But then we jump all the way over to schizophrenia, which is supposedly a completely separate part of the universe. And we're describing exactly the same thing. And so why do we have all these separate disorders in the obsessive-compulsive disorder section? Why don't we just have obsessive-compulsive disorder? Sometimes people count, sometimes they wash, sometimes they check, sometimes they hoard. So we've got a new disorder in here too called hoarding disorder. And on it goes. So that's just illustrating how when you try and get inside this manual and actually use it, you run into all these problems.
Right.
And the top people in the field have had literally 2 decades to try and get this clearer and more sorted out. Instead of getting it more clear and more sorted out, they've added on several new disorders.
Right.
The skin picking and the hoarding.
So, from your perspective as a psychiatrist, I mean, clearly this would be very frustrating, I can imagine. What is your solution? What are you left with? What are you able to do?
Well, there's my kind of kidding, but not really solution. So this book is 945 pages, and it sells for somewhere between $150 to $200 to the general public.
Wow.
And it'll sell hundreds of thousands of copies.
Because every psychiatrist has to have one.
And every library, every psychologist, every mental health clinic.
Right.
I say that you could have 1 page for your diagnostic manual. And the diagnostic categories are no mental disorder or mental disorder. So first of all, you decide which of those you have. And then under mental disorder, it's either mild, moderate, or severe. And then in each of those categories, it's predominant depression symptoms, predominant eating disorder symptoms, predominant hallucinations, predominant whatever, or mixed. And I can't see that there's any medication decision or any psychotherapy decision or any decision that you couldn't make with that simple little scheme.
Right.
Instead, we've got like 945 pages of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of diagnoses when we only have a couple of, 4 or 5 different categories of medications, and we only have 3 or 4 or 5 main types of psychotherapy.
So that's an interesting point that you bring up. So 4 or 5 classes of drugs.
Like antidepressants, antipsychotics, mood stabilizers, benzodiazepines, anti-anxiety drugs. And then for ADHD, which is kind of separate, we've got the stimulants.
Right.
But most of adult psychiatry, it's mood stabilizers, antipsychotics, antidepressants.
And then we've got 900 pages worth of however many disorders are included there. And all of these different disorders that all end up with these kind of same drugs, or maybe a different combination.
A combination of drugs. So a lot of people, no matter where you are in this manual, you're likely on a mood stabilizer, pretty good chance an antipsychotic, maybe an antidepressant. If you're in the mental health system, no matter where you fit in this manual. Mm-hmm. So all of these pages are not really telling us that much about meds, no meds, and which meds to choose in the end.
So in terms of, what you might be able to offer to other psychiatrists who are undoubtedly in the same position. They're really excited. They just got their new DSM-5 in the mail. They're looking through it, and then they realize, wow, this is not less confusing. This is more confusing. What would you offer to them?
Well, the main thing is that really it's not that big a deal in terms of changes from DSM-4 to DSM-5. It's really just tweaks and tinkering. So there's no huge change in your practice required, number one. And this is just the way the system operates. The whole culture, the insurance companies, the profession is bought into these DSM diagnoses. Mm-hmm. In order to provide people services, you clearly have to use these diagnostic labels. And so my main point is just not to buy into them as if it's really written in stone and it came down from the mountain. And just see it as, oh, well, this is what we've got to use currently.
Right. Now, just one last closing question. In terms of people who have received a diagnosis, in what you're saying about not taking this in stone, could that also be applied over to people who maybe they've received one of the diagnoses out of this manual?
Absolutely. These psychiatric labels are not medical diseases that are known for scientific medical fact. They're descriptions of your behavior and how you're feeling and what you describe to the doctor. They overlap a great deal, and there's a lot of confusion about how to sort them out inside the manual. Mm-hmm. So just don't see it as something really written in stone that's really concrete that you have.
Right.
It's just a set of problems, a set of experiences, a set of feelings.
Right.
That doesn't mean that a mental health professional can't help you. Just don't take it too concretely and seriously.
Right. And I think it's important to recognize that, within this manual, this is not using a blood test. This is not using any kind of real physiological test. This is just observation. So
Right.
We're actually observing someone's behaviors, someone's emotions, and then based on observation of their behaviors and their actions, then we're going to give them this diagnosis or something.
Right. That's entirely what it is.
Okay. So as somebody who's maybe received one of these diagnoses and is maybe going down the path of the prescribed drugs that were prescribed as a result of the diagnosis, just keeping in mind that this is not a definitive, they didn't test my blood and discovered that I had this. There was one person who spoke with me for whatever amount of time and observed me and gave me, said diagnosis.
Right. Now, this doesn't mean that you're not in fact feeling really lousy, that you're not in fact highly disturbed, or that you don't have serious problems, or it's not real. That's not what it means.
Right.
It's just that there isn't a blood test that goes along with it. It's not a medical diagnosis.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much for your time today. I do really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Please be sure to click on that like button if you enjoyed this video or if you learned anything here with us today. Be sure to subscribe to the Psychiatry channel so you can see all of our future videos, and I look forward to seeing you again next time.